The bridge at the edge of Millbrook has always held secrets. They whisper in the mist that rises from the river at dawn, echo in the creaking of weathered wooden planks, and linger in the shadows that stretch like grasping fingers across its length when night falls. But the villagers speak of one secret that refuses to stay buried beneath the murky waters below, a massive white hound that materializes in the darkest hours, its spectral form moving without sound, its eyes reflecting a knowledge no living creature should possess. Some claim it watches over travelers, others swear it hungers for them. I never believed either story until 3 nights ago, when I learned that some legends survive because they contain terrible truths. The assignment seemed straightforward enough. As a freelance photographer specializing in local folklore, I documented dozens of supposedly haunted locations across New England. Millbrook was just another pin on my map, a sleepy village with an old stone bridge and a ghost story that had persisted for generations. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, checked into the only motel on Main Street, and spent the day interviewing locals about the phantom dog. The bartender at the Rusty Nail told me about his cousin, who'd seen it last winter, a massive white shape trotting across the bridge before vanishing through the stone railing. An elderly woman working at the general store warned me not to approach it if I saw it, saying those who tried to touch it were never quite right afterward. The sheriff rolled his eyes when I mentioned my project, but admitted that every few years, someone would wrap their car around a tree near the bridge, invariably claiming they'd swerve to avoid a white dog that wasn't there when help arrived. I took these stories with the same professional skepticism I always maintained. People wanted to believe in something beyond the ordinary. Towns needed their legends. I would capture some atmospheric night shots of the bridge, maybe manipulate the fog in post-production to suggest a canine shape, and move on to the next assignment. That first night, I set up my tripod at the eastern approach to the bridge shortly after midnight. The air felt unusually heavy, thick with humidity that beaded on my equipment and skin. Sounds seemed to travel differently here. The babbling of the river below distorted into something almost like muttering voices. My flashlight carved weak tunnels through the darkness as I adjusted my settings and began shooting long exposures. 2 hours passed, with nothing but the occasional rustling of nocturnal creatures in the underbrush. My shoulders ached from hunching over the camera, and the night chill had begun to seep through my jacket. I was packing up when I felt it, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure, as if the air itself had inhaled and held its breath. The hairs on my arms rose before my conscious mind registered why. No insects chirped, no leaves rustled. The natural white noise of the world had simply stopped. I turned slowly toward the center of the bridge, and my heart slammed against my ribcage. 20 yards away stood a dog unlike any I'd ever seen. Its coat was not merely white, but seemed to absorb the moonlight and radiate it back with an intensity that hurt my eyes. It was massive, shoulder height reaching what must have been 4 feet, with a broad chest and powerful limbs. But it was the stillness that disturbed me most. No panting breath, no twitching ears, no shifting of weight from paw to paw, just watching me with eyes that gleamed not with reflected light, but with something that seemed to pulse from within. My camera. I had to get a photo. My hand fumbled for it, fingers suddenly clumsy with adrenaline. The viewfinder trembled as I raised it to my eye, but the bridge was empty. I lowered the camera, and there it stood again, closer now, close enough that I could see how the edges of its form seemed to blur into the darkness surrounding it. A violent shiver ran through me, my breath stuttering in my lungs. Sweat broke out across my forehead despite the cold. I took an involuntary step backward, and the creature's head tilted slightly, almost curiously. I told myself it was just a dog, someone's pet, perhaps an albino Great Pyrenees that had escaped his yard. But as it took a step toward me, its paw passed partially through a section of railing, as if it were no more substantial than the mist rising from the river. I ran, my equipment abandoned. I sprinted toward my rental car, the keys nearly slipping from my sweat-slicked palms. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness as I reversed in a wild arc and accelerated toward town. In my rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the middle of the road, watching my retreat with that same unnerving stillness. Sleep eluded me that night. I paced my motel room until dawn, alternating between rational explanations and the growing certainty that what I'd seen defied natural law. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were filled with glowing eyes and silent pursuit. The next day passed in a fog of fatigue and unease. I retrieved my equipment, half expecting it to be gone, but found everything undisturbed. The skeptical part of my mind suggested I'd experienced a combination of exhaustion and suggestion, the power of local lore, working on an imagination primed by hours of interviews about the very phenomenon I thought I'd witnessed. By evening, I'd nearly convinced myself this was the case, yet I found myself driving back to the bridge as darkness fell, drawn by the photographer's eternal curse, the need to capture what others could not. This time, I parked on the western side and approached on foot, my camera ready. The night was clearer, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Every few steps, I stopped to listen, to scan the shadows. Nothing seemed amiss, and I began to relax, focusing instead on composition and lighting. It was the reflection in my lens that saved me. As I adjusted the aperture, I caught a flash of white in the glass, behind me, moving without sound. I spun, nearly losing my footing on the gravel shoulder. The dog stood 10 feet away, its massive form blocking the path back to my car. This close, I could see details I'd missed before, how its fur moved wrong, rippling against the breeze rather than with it, how its eyes contained pinprick pupils that seemed to expand and contract, independent of the light. My mouth went desert dry, my pulse a deafening roar in my ears. I raised my camera on instinct, the flash illuminating the creature in a burst of light. It didn't blink, didn't flinch, but something in its gaze intensified, and suddenly I couldn't move. My limbs grew heavy, unresponsive, as if my very blood had turned to lead in my veins. A pressure built behind my eyes, not pain but an overwhelming sense of presence, of something vast forcing its way into my consciousness. Images flooded my mind. The bridge as it had been a century ago, a carriage tipping over the edge, a desperate leap into churning waters, a white shape fighting against the current, decades of silent vigil, of watching, of waiting, vehicles swerving, metal crumpling, but then intervention. Spectral paws pressing against steering wheels, ghostly forms absorbing impact. Guardian, protector, sentinel. The words weren't heard but felt, imprinted directly onto my thoughts with a force that brought me to my knees. Through the haze of intrusion, I realized what the locals had misunderstood all these years. The accidents hadn't been caused by the dog. They had been prevented by it. How long I remained there, locked in silent communion with the impossible, I cannot say. When awareness returned, I was alone, slumped against the bridge railing with my camera beside me. The digital display showed only static where the flash photo should have been. I left Millbrook the next morning. The article I submitted to the Folklore Journal mentioned only local superstition and the curious number of near accidents at the bridge. I included none of my personal experience, nothing of what I'd learned. But each night since then, I've woken at precisely 3:17 a.m., my heart racing, my skin damp with sweat, certain that somewhere in the darkness of my bedroom, patient eyes are watching, not with malice, but with the quiet expectation that one day, I too will understand what it means to stand guardian over the boundary between worlds. The shadows in high places aren't always cast by objects. Sometimes they're cast by things that shouldn't exist at all. I learned this truth on the rooftop of Harmon Tower, where the city lights below create a false sense of safety, pinpricks of humanity that make you forget how alone you really are. 40 stories above the ground. My name is Michael Reeves. I've been the night janitor at Harmon Tower for almost 7 years now. The midnight shift suits me. Fewer people to deal with. More peaceful. At least it was peaceful until 3 weeks ago. It began during a mandatory overtime shift. The building manager had requested a complete security check of all floors, including the seldom visited rooftop terrace, where executives occasionally entertain clients during warmer months. October had brought an early chill, and the roof had been closed for weeks. The service elevator groaned as it carried me to the top floor. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched as I used my master key to unlock the heavy metal door leading to the roof. A gust of cold air hit my face as I stepped outside, carrying the faint smell of ozone and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar. I swept my flashlight across the empty terrace. All the patio furniture had been stored away for the season, leaving only concrete planters and the steel security railing that encircled the perimeter. My job was simple. Check that the emergency exits were secure and ensure no one had tampered with the rooftop equipment. That's when I noticed him. A tall figure stood near the eastern edge, motionless, facing away from me. He wore what appeared to be a dark suit, his posture unnaturally rigid as he gazed out at the cityscape. My first thought was that an executive had somehow gained unauthorized access. Not my problem, but still something to report. I called out asking if I could help him. My voice sounded thin in the open air, swallowed by the ambient hum of distant traffic and rooftop ventilation systems. He didn't respond immediately. Then, with a movement that seemed too fluid, too smooth, he began to turn. Not his whole body, just his head, rotating slowly toward me. My flashlight beam caught the side of his face, and my blood turned to ice. What should have been human features appeared warped, as if viewed through rippling water. A dense shadow seemed to cling to his skin, moving independently of the light I cast upon it. His eyes, God, his eyes were just empty voids, 2 black holes punched into reality. I stumbled backward, my spine colliding with the metal door. The flashlight slipped from my sweat-slicked palm, clattering against concrete. The figure moved then, not toward me, but toward the edge. Without hesitation, without breaking stride, he passed through the security railing as if it were nothing but smoke, and vanished into the darkness beyond. My heart hammered against my ribcage as I fumbled for the flashlight. When I finally managed to direct the beam toward the spot where he disappeared, there was nothing. No body on the street below. No sign anyone had been there at all. I reported the incident the next morning. The building manager listened with thinly veiled skepticism, suggesting I'd seen another maintenance worker, or perhaps a shadow cast by equipment. He promised to review security footage, but his dismissive tone made it clear he considered the matter closed. 2 days later, marketing staff from the 39th floor began reporting strange sounds, footsteps and scraping noises coming from above their ceiling. I reminded myself that the 40th floor was mostly mechanical rooms and storage. Above that was only the roof, with no official access except through secured doors. I volunteered to investigate. The building manager agreed, likely to humor me and put an end to the complaints. Armed with my flashlight and a growing sense of dread, I checked every room on the 40th floor. Nothing seemed disturbed. The access door to the roof remained locked, just as I'd left it days earlier. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment seemed too quiet, too empty. I found myself listening for footsteps above me, though I lived on the top floor of my building. When I returned to work the following evening, the complaints had multiplied. Now staff from other departments reported hearing footsteps overhead. Some described a sensation of being watched, even when alone in their offices. One executive working late swore he saw a tall figure reflected in his computer screen, standing behind his chair. But when he turned, no one was there. My palms grew clammy as I rode the elevator up for my shift. The fluorescent lights flickered briefly, and in that momentary darkness, I felt something brush against my neck, like fingers, but cold and damp. I began finding other things, impossible things. Footprints on freshly mopped floors that led nowhere. Doors I'd locked found standing open minutes later. Glimpses of movement in peripheral vision that vanished when directly observed. Last night I was cleaning the 39th floor when the overhead lights shut off simultaneously. In the dim emergency lighting, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the ceiling above me. They stopped directly overhead. My throat constricted as I looked up. A dark stain was spreading across the ceiling tiles. Not water, something thicker. It dripped down, forming a perfect circle on the floor. Within the circle, like a reflection in still water, I saw a face looking back at me. My face, but with empty, void-like eyes and a shadow that moved independently across its features. I'm writing this now from the employee break room, waiting for my shift to begin. The building manager called an emergency meeting today. They've reviewed the security footage from the night I saw the figure. According to the timestamp, I spent 17 minutes on the roof, not the 5 I remember. More disturbing is what the cameras captured. Me, standing alone at the edge of the roof, engaged in animated conversation with empty air. Then, footage shows me turning toward the camera, my face briefly distorted by what the building manager described as digital interference. My reflection in the microwave door seems wrong somehow. The face looking back at me doesn't quite match my movements, and I can't shake the feeling that when I blink it doesn't. They're calling me now. Maintenance is needed on the roof. Something about a door that won't stay locked. I think he's waiting for me up there. I think he's been waiting for a very long time. And somehow, I already know what I'll see when I look over the edge of the roof tonight. My own face, looking up at me from 40 stories below, watching as something wearing my skin goes home in my place. The night had a way of swallowing sound on Route 67. Endless stretches of highway bordered by dense forest created a tunnel of darkness that my headlights barely penetrated. I'd driven this route for 15 years, but that night, something felt different. The air inside the bus hung heavy, carrying a chill that the heating system couldn't seem to dispel. My skin prickled with a sensation I hadn't felt since I was a child, the certainty of being watched. I adjusted the rearview mirror, counting the sleeping passengers as I always did during the midnight run. 7 people total on this Tuesday night. A middle-aged couple in the front, 3 college kids sprawled across the middle, a businessman with his laptop, and in the very back, a gaunt figure in a dark coat. I frowned, squinting into the mirror. Something was wrong with my view of the back row. The seat appeared occupied. I could see the shape, the dark outline of shoulders. But the mirror showed only empty upholstery where a reflection should be. My stomach clenched. I blinked hard, adjusted the mirror again. The discrepancy remained. The figure existed in my peripheral vision but vanished in the reflection. Sweat beaded along my hairline despite the chill. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the angle, fatigue playing with my perception after 8 hours on the road. I stole glances at the back row for the next hour, my pulse quickening each time. The figure remained motionless, face obscured by shadows, hands folded in its lap. None of the other passengers seemed to notice anything unusual, which somehow made it worse. The rational explanations I constructed crumbled with each passing mile. At 2:17 a.m., we approached the Midway rest stop. My throat had gone dry, my knuckles white around the steering wheel. I announced our 20-minute break in a voice that sounded stretched thin, foreign to my ears. The passengers stirred, gathering their belongings. I watched in the mirror as they filed out, counting again. 6. The back row passenger hadn't moved. Protocol dictated I check the bus before leaving it unattended. My legs felt weighted as I walked down the aisle, heart hammering against my ribs. 3 steps from the back row, I stopped. Cold sweat trickled down my spine. The seat was empty, not just unoccupied, utterly vacant, as though no one had sat there at all. Except for a single bus ticket, yellowed with age, placed precisely in the center of the seat. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt wrong somehow, too fragile, like it might disintegrate between my fingers. The destination was printed in faded ink, Route 67 to Millfield. The date stamp read April 8th, 2005, exactly 20 years ago to the day. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in shallow gasps. According to company records, nothing unusual had happened on that date. But the older drivers, they had stories they only shared after a few drinks, whispers about a stormy night, a bus that never arrived, passengers who were never found. When I exited the bus, the night air hit me like a physical blow. The rest stop stood eerily quiet, fluorescent lights flickering over empty parking spaces. I asked the attendant if he'd seen anyone unusual come in, a tall figure in a dark coat. His blank stare as he shook his head sent ice through my veins. When I described the passenger, he simply pointed to the wall behind me. A faded memorial plaque listed the names of 14 people lost when Route 67's midnight bus veered off Blackwell Bridge during a storm. 20 years ago. Today's date. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I rounded up the passengers. I counted them obsessively. 6. All accounted for. None mentioned the figure from the back row. When I asked the businessman if he'd noticed anyone sitting behind him, he looked at me strangely, informing me that he'd specifically chosen his seat because the back was empty. The return to the bus felt like walking to an execution. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Every gust of wind carried whispers just below the threshold of understanding. I checked each seat methodically, finding nothing out of place. The ticket I'd found had disappeared from my pocket. As we rejoined the highway, rain began to fall, light at first, then in sheets that reduced visibility to mere yards. Blackwell Bridge lay 30 miles ahead. My hands slick with sweat, I radioed dispatch, reporting weather conditions too dangerous to continue. The dispatcher confirmed, instructing me to divert to the emergency way station, 5 miles north. In the mirror, through the curtain of rain, a dark shape materialized in the back row, its head tilted slightly, as though curious. A face emerged from shadow, gaunt, pale, with eyes that reflected no light. Its lips curved into what might have been a smile. I swerved, narrowly missing the guardrail. When I looked again, the seat was empty, but on the windshield, from the inside, fog gathered in the unmistakable outline of a handprint, and beside it, traced by an invisible finger, "Wrong turn." The radio crackled with static as I gripped the wheel, fighting to keep the bus on the road. Through the haze of fear and rain, I realized with absolute clarity that I wasn't driving toward safety. Every turn, every mile had been leading us back to Blackwell Bridge, back to complete what had started 20 years ago, unless I found the strength to change course.